In a mansion where silence echoes louder than any word, a millionaire lives trapped by guilt and the pain of loss. His son, deaf since birth, has never heard a laugh, a melody, not even the sound of his own father's love. Everything changes when a young nanny arrives and dares to challenge the impossible, teaching the boy to feel the world with his heart. And when the piano plays again, the sound no one expected to hear transforms silence into a miracle. The Thompson family mansion, imposing on the Malibu hillside overlooking the Pacific Ocean in California, seemed like a mausoleum of marble and glass. All residents of the luxury-gated community knew the tragic story of that family, but few truly understood the silence that dominated those walls. Bernard Thompson, owner of one of the country's largest engineering firms, walked through the extensive corridors without making a sound, as if even his footsteps had been trained to respect the emptiness that had settled in that house. On the upper floor, a 10-year-old boy watched the horizon through his bedroom window. Michael Thompson had been born deaf. His large brown eyes, inherited from his mother, observed the world with curiosity and melancholy. The accident that had taken Claire, his mother, had happened when he was only 5 years old. Since then, father and son lived like strangers under the same roof, connected by blood but separated by an abyss of pain and silence. On that specific day, something different was happening at the mansion. Mr. Peterson, the butler who had served the Thompsons for over 20 years, organized the arrival of a young woman. Her name was Beatrice Olson, 24 years old, with curly hair tied in an improvised bun, simple but clean and well-ironed clothes. Coming from Aspen, a mountain region in Colorado, she had secured the nanny position through an agency specializing in services for high-net-worth families. "Mr. Thompson doesn't like noise or interference," the butler explained as he led Beatrice through the corridors. "The boy has a strict routine. Meals at 7, noon and 6 in the evening. Private lessons from 9 to 11. Medication at 8 at night. You should not form emotional bonds with him. Just supervise and report any problems." Beatrice nodded, still intimidated by the luxury around her. Persian rugs, works of art on the walls, furniture that seemed to come straight out of a museum. As she walked, she noticed that there were no photographs in sight, no sign of family life, of shared memories. "And Mr. Thompson? When will I meet him?" she asked. "The master is rarely home. He leaves at 6 in the morning, returns after 9 at night. You will probably cross paths very little." As they entered the children's wing, Beatrice was surprised by the impersonality of the space. Despite being spacious and well-equipped, Michael's room looked more like a decor showroom than a child's environment. Toys organized by size and color, books perfectly aligned on the shelf, no posters or drawings on the walls. In the center of the room, sitting at a table, was Michael. Concentrated on a drawing he was making, he did not notice their presence. Beatrice immediately noticed his rigid posture, his restrained movements. It was as if the boy had learned to occupy the smallest possible space in the world. "Michael," the butler called, before remembering that the boy could not hear him. He approached and lightly touched his shoulder. The boy startled, turning quickly. His eyes showed a mix of surprise and apprehension. Mr. Peterson made some gestures that Beatrice did not understand, probably a rudimentary form of communication they had developed. Then he indicated Beatrice. "This is the new nanny, Mrs. Olson." Michael looked at Beatrice with suspicion, his eyes studying every detail of the young woman's face. He did not smile or show any sign of welcome. He simply returned his attention to the drawing, ignoring them completely. "He doesn't communicate much," Peterson explained. "He has a sign language teacher who comes twice a week. But progress is slow. Dr. Caldwell says that emotional trauma has complicated his learning." Beatrice slowly approached the boy, kneeling to be at his eye level. She noticed that he was drawing a beach, with waves and a blue sky. Carefully, she picked up a blue pencil from the table and drew a small boat on one of the waves. Michael stopped, observing the intervention with curiosity. For a brief moment, something sparkled in his eyes, perhaps surprise, perhaps interest. "Mrs. Olson," the butler interrupted, "please do not disturb young Michael's activities." Beatrice recoiled, realizing she had broken some unspoken rule of the house. At that moment, she felt the weight of the task ahead of her. It was not just about caring for a deaf boy, but trying to reach him through the layers of isolation and sadness that enveloped him. When the butler left, she remained watching Michael, who had returned to his drawing. Now, however, he continued the small boat she had started, adding small details like a sail and a flag. "Hi, Michael," she said, even knowing he couldn't hear. "My name is Beatrice, but you can call me B. Let's get to know each other, okay?" Downstairs, Bernard Thompson entered the house earlier than usual. At 43, his face bore the marks of someone who had aged prematurely. Despite his still athletic physique, a result of daily gym sessions that functioned more as therapy than vanity, his eyes seemed permanently tired, shadowed by sleepless nights and days of excessive work. "Mr. Thompson," the butler was surprised to see him. "We weren't expecting you so early." "I had to cancel a meeting," he replied dryly, handing his jacket to the employee. "Has the new nanny arrived?" "Yes, sir." "She's with Michael now." Bernard nodded, heading to his office. Before entering, however, he asked without turning, "Was she informed of the rules?" "Yes, sir. All of them." Inside the office, Bernard poured himself a drink and walked to the window. From there, he could see part of the backyard, where an infinity pool seemed to merge with the ocean in the distance. Claire loved that view. She said it was like having infinity within reach of her eyes. Thinking of her still hurt, even after 5 years. His phone vibrated with a message from his secretary. Dr. Salter called again about Michael's tests. Bernard ignored the notification. He had already consulted the best specialists in the country and abroad. Nothing would change his son's condition. The deafness was irreversible, aggravated by the trauma of the accident. The accident. He closed his eyes, trying to push away the memories of that rainy night, of the car overturning on the mountain road, of Claire's body. No, he couldn't think about it. He emptied the whiskey glass in one gulp and returned to his desk, diving into the financial reports that demanded his attention. In Michael's room, Beatrice watched the boy with growing fascination. Despite his initially distant posture, he seemed to be slowly opening up, not through conventional words or gestures, but through drawing. After finishing the beach, he started another, this time drawing what appeared to be a feminine face with long, wavy hair. Beatrice noticed that her belongings had already been taken to the room adjacent to Michael's. It was a small space compared to the rest of the house, yet still more luxurious than any place she had ever slept. A comfortable bed, a spacious wardrobe, a private bathroom with beauty products that probably cost more than her monthly salary. On the bedside table, there was a detailed manual about Michael's routine. Medications, emergency contacts, and house rules. The last page contained a confidentiality agreement, which she had already signed at the agency. The Thompsons' life was to remain within those walls. As she organized her few clothes in the wardrobe, Beatrice thought of her mother, Mrs. Ann, who remained in Aspen. The cancer treatment consumed almost the entire family budget, and the generous salary offered by the Thompsons would be crucial to cover the next chemotherapy sessions. She could not fail at this job. Returning to Michael's room, she found him looking out the window, his small body silhouetted against the evening light. There was something profoundly lonely in that image that squeezed Beatrice's heart. Without thinking much, she approached and stood beside him, contemplating the same landscape. Michael noticed her presence but did not move away. For a few minutes they remained like that, side by side, watching the sun begin to dip below the horizon, painting the California sky with shades of orange and pink. Beatrice had an idea. She took a notepad from her pocket and wrote in large, clear letters, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" She showed it to the boy, pointing to the sunset. Michael read it and, to Beatrice's surprise, took the pad and pen. In childish but legible handwriting, he wrote, "Yes." That single word, just 3 letters, represented for Beatrice the first crack in the wall separating Michael from the world. A small glimpse of communication, of connection. Dinner was served promptly at 6 o'clock. Michael ate alone in his room, while Beatrice dined in the kitchen with the other staff. Mrs. Marcia, the housekeeper, a 60-year-old woman with an austere air, seemed to scrutinize her with suspicion. "How long do you intend to stay with us, Miss Olson?" "As long as necessary," Beatrice replied. "I need the job." "Many came before you," Mr. Peterson commented. "None lasted more than a few weeks. Young Michael is challenging. "And Mr. Thompson doesn't make it easy," added the gardener. Mr. Julian, before being silenced by a stern look from the housekeeper. "The master suffered a lot," Mrs. Marcia defended. "He lost his wife, has a son who can never hear his voice. Not everyone can bear that burden." Beatrice listened attentively, gathering information about the family that now employed her. It was clear there was more to that story than met the eye. After dinner, she returned to Michael's room to supervise his nightly medication. The boy was already in his pajamas, sitting on the bed with a picture book about marine animals. Beatrice noticed that many pages had notes in the margins, probably made by the private tutor. After taking his medicine, Michael lay down, pulling the blanket up to his chin. Beatrice turned off the main light, leaving only the bedside lamp on. She was about to leave when she noticed something under the bed, a partially visible wooden box. Curious, she knelt and pulled out the box. Michael immediately got up, alarmed, trying to stop her. His eyes showed panic. "Sorry," Beatrice said, pulling her hands away. She made a gesture indicating she would not touch the box again. Michael relaxed a little but remained vigilant. Beatrice picked up the notepad again. "May I see?" she wrote, pointing to the box. The boy hesitated, clearly torn between distrust and the desire to share. Finally, he nodded his head. Beatrice opened the box carefully. Inside were photographs, some letters, and a small perfume bottle. The photos showed a beautiful woman with long wavy hair, smiling next to a younger, happier Bernard. In some images she held a baby, newborn Michael. "Your mother?" Beatrice asked aloud, before remembering to write the question. Michael nodded, carefully picking up one of the photos, as if it were a fragile treasure. His fingers delicately traced the woman's face in the image. At that moment, Beatrice understood the extent of that boy's pain. It was not only deafness that isolated him from the world, but the absence of a mother who would never return, and an emotionally distant father. In the hallway, without them noticing, Bernard Thompson observed the scene through the half-open door. His face remained impassive, but something in his eyes betrayed a deep emotion, perhaps anger, perhaps pain, perhaps a mixture of both. Silently he walked away, returning to the office where he would spend another night working to exhaustion, trying to fill the emptiness in his chest with numbers and contracts. When Michael finally fell asleep, Beatrice carefully put the box back under the bed and left the room, leaving the door ajar. In the silent hallway, she made a silent promise to herself. She would find a way to reach that boy, to break the silence that imprisoned him, not only the physical silence of deafness, but the emotional silence that permeated that entire house. The first week at the Thompson mansion passed quickly. Beatrice observed every detail of the routine, every movement within that rigid and suffocating environment. Michael followed his schedule like a little soldier, woke up at 6, showered, dressed in the clothes set out by the housekeeper, had breakfast precisely at 7. There were no variations, no room for spontaneity. Bernard Thompson remained an absent figure. In 7 days, Beatrice had seen him only 3 times, always at a glance, always with a closed expression. He seemed to deliberately avoid times when he might encounter his son. When he was home, he locked himself in his office or bedroom. Meals were served separately, Michael in the children's wing, Bernard in the office or dining room. On Saturday morning, something different happened. During breakfast, Michael dropped a glass of juice which shattered on the floor. The boy immediately flinched, as if expecting a severe reprimand. Beatrice noticed the fear in his eyes and quickly knelt, beginning to clean up the shards. "Don't worry," she said, even knowing he couldn't hear her. Her tone of voice, however, was gentle, and her smile tried to convey tranquility. Mrs. Marcia rushed into the kitchen, drawn by the noise. "What happened here?" "An accident, that's all," Beatrice replied, continuing to clean. "The master doesn't like messes," the housekeeper warned, looking sternly at Michael, who kept his eyes down. "It was just a broken glass," Beatrice defended, instinctively positioning herself between the housekeeper and the boy. It could happen to anyone. After the housekeeper left, grumbling about indiscipline, Beatrice noticed that Michael was watching her with a curious expression. He seemed surprised that someone had defended him. She smiled, picking up the notepad again. "Accidents happen, it's okay." Michael read the message several times, as if trying to understand a completely new concept. Finally, a small smile appeared on his lips, the first Beatrice had seen. That afternoon, taking advantage of the free time after lessons, Beatrice took Michael to the garden. The mansion had a vast estate that sloped down to a small private beach, isolated from neighbors by rock formations. The day was sunny, perfect for outdoor activities. To Beatrice's surprise, the boy seemed nervous. "You don't usually come here?" she asked, before remembering to write it on the pad. Michael took the paper and wrote, "Dad doesn't like it." That simple answer said a lot. The beautiful garden, the beach access, everything remained unused like so many other things in that house. Life seemed to have been suspended 5 years ago when Claire had left. Determined to change that situation, Beatrice took Michael's hand and led him to the sand. The boy walked hesitantly, occasionally looking towards the house as if fearing a reprimand. Gradually, however, the tension decreased. The sea breeze, the warmth of the sun on his skin, the feeling of sand between his toes, sensory experiences that did not depend on hearing to be appreciated. Sitting on the sand, they began to build a castle. Beatrice showed him how to mold the towers, the walls, the moats. Michael, initially shy, soon became enthusiastic about the activity. His small fingers worked with surprising skill, creating intricate details. Suddenly, a stronger wave reached the construction, destroying part of the castle. Beatrice expected the boy to be upset, but to her surprise, Michael began to laugh. It was a unique sound, a little hoarse, as if rarely used. The spontaneity of that laugh deeply moved Beatrice. When they returned home hours later, they were dirty with sand and their clothes were wet, but Michael seemed different. There was a lightness in his expression, a sparkle in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Mr. Peterson intercepted them in the hallway, visibly disappointed. "Miss Olson, young Michael has piano lessons at 3 o'clock on Saturdays. You are late." Beatrice was confused. "Piano lessons? But how?" The butler interrupted her with a meaningful look, indicating that she should not continue in front of the boy. "Please take him to clean up and bring him to the music room in 15 minutes. While helping Michael shower and change, Beatrice tried to understand the situation. A deaf boy taking piano lessons? It seemed like some kind of cruelty, a constant reminder of something he could never fully appreciate. The music room was on the ground floor, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden. In the center, a majestic Steinway grand piano rested like a sculpture. The environment was impeccably clean, but Beatrice noticed something strange, a thin layer of dust on the instrument's keys, as if it was rarely used. The teacher, Mrs. Eleanor, was a woman of approximately 60 years old, with an austere air but kind eyes. After the introductions, Beatrice remained in the corner of the room watching as Michael sat at the piano. "You're new," Mrs. Eleanor commented in a low voice, approaching Beatrice. "You must be wondering why I teach piano to a boy who can't hear." Beatrice nodded, embarrassed that her curiosity had been so evident. "It's not about hearing," the lady explained. "It's about feeling. Music is vibration. Michael can feel the vibrations through the piano, through the floor." And it was his mother's request, before she passed. She was a pianist. Beatrice watched as the teacher guided Michael's hands over the keys. The boy closed his eyes as he played, as if trying to capture something beyond his usual perception. There was something profoundly moving in that scene, the search for a connection with something he had never fully experienced. After the lesson, Mrs. Eleanor called Beatrice for a private conversation. "The boy is different today," she commented. "More present, more connected." "We went to the beach," Beatrice explained. "I think he needed that. Fresh air, sunshine. You know, in 5 years it's the first time I've seen him with sand under his nails and salt in his hair," the teacher said with a sad smile. Claire loved the sea. She said it was where she truly felt alive. After she was gone, Bernard forbade any mention of the ocean, as if he could erase the pain by erasing the memories. At dinner that night, Beatrice noticed that Michael ate with more appetite than usual. The trip to the beach had awakened something in him, an energy, a vitality long dormant. As she tidied the boy's room for the night, Beatrice had an idea. Instead of simply putting Michael to bed and turning off the lights, as protocol dictated, she picked up a book from the shelf. It was an illustrated volume about the oceans, with beautiful images of corals, fish, and other marine creatures. They sat together on the bed, and Beatrice began to leaf through the book, pointing to the figures and writing small comments on the pad. Michael absorbed everything with genuine interest, his eyes lit up by discovery. When they reached a page about whales, the boy pointed to the information about how these animals communicate through songs that travel for miles in the ocean. He took the pad and wrote, "What does it sound like?" The question caught Beatrice by surprise. How to explain sound to someone who had never experienced it? After thinking for a moment, she had an idea. She took Michael's hand and placed it on her own chest. She breathed deeply, then hummed a soft melody. The boy could feel the vibrations of her voice through the contact. His eyes widened in understanding, not of the sound itself, but of the sensation it produced. Beatrice then wrote, "Some things we don't need to hear to feel." In the hallway, without them noticing, Bernard Thompson observed the scene through the half-open door. His face, normally impassive, betrayed a complex mixture of emotions: sadness, nostalgia, perhaps even a touch of hope. For a moment he seemed about to enter the room, but then retreated, silently disappearing down the corridor. The next morning, Sunday, the routine continued. After breakfast, Beatrice noticed that Michael seemed restless, repeatedly looking out the window as if expecting something. When she asked what was wrong, he wrote on the pad, "Beach?" That simple request represented so much: the desire to repeat the pleasant experience of the previous day, the courage to express a wish of his own in a house where his wishes rarely mattered. "Of course," Beatrice replied, writing animatedly on the pad. "Shall we look for shells today?" They were about to leave when Mr. Peterson appeared in the hallway. "Miss Olson, Mr. Thompson would like to see you in his office immediately." The tone left no doubt it was not a request but an order. Beatrice felt a chill in her stomach. Would she be reprimanded for taking Michael to the beach, for breaking the unwritten rules of the house? "I'll be there in a minute," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Turning to Michael, she quickly wrote, "I need to talk to your father. I'll be right back and we'll go to the beach. I promise." Bernard Thompson's office was exactly as she imagined: elegant, impersonal, dominated by a large mahogany desk and bookshelves, filled with books that seemed never to have been opened. The man stood by the window, contemplating the sea that stretched to the horizon. "Mr. Thompson, you wanted to see me?" He turned slowly. Up close, Beatrice noticed the lines of fatigue on his face, the beginning of grey hair at his temples. He didn't look older than 45, but something in his eyes suggested a much greater weight. "Miss Olson, I was informed that you took my son to the beach yesterday." His voice was cold, controlled, but Beatrice perceived the underlying tension. "Yes, sir. I thought it would be good for him to have some fresh air, some sunshine." "I see." Bernard walked to his desk, running his fingers over the polished wood. "I was also informed that you have been spending more time than necessary with Michael, reading to him, doing activities that are not on the approved schedule." Beatrice took a deep breath, gathering courage. "With all due respect, Mr. Thompson, Michael is a child. He needs more than just a strict routine. He needs interaction, affection, experiences." "Miss Olson," Bernard interrupted, his tone now harsher, "you were hired to supervise my son, not to decide what's best for him. The rules of this house exist for a reason." "What reason exactly?" The words escaped before Beatrice could contain them. "To keep Michael isolated? To prevent him from living?" A tense silence followed her words. Beatrice immediately regretted her audacity. She needed that job. She couldn't afford to be fired. To her surprise, however, Bernard did not explode in anger. Instead, he sank into his chair, suddenly looking very tired. "You don't understand," he said, his voice now lower. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then explain it to me," Beatrice asked, her tone softer. "Help me understand why a 10-year-old boy has a stricter routine than an executive." Bernard looked up, studying her for a long moment. Finally, he said, "Michael has a delicate condition. His deafness is only part of the problem. The trauma, the accident." He stopped as if the words were too painful. "Doctors recommend stability, predictability. Any alteration could trigger crises." Beatrice realized there was more to the story than met the eye, but knew it was not the time to press. "I understand your concern," she said, "but I observed Michael this week. He responded positively to our interactions. The beach trip yesterday," he laughed, Mr. Thompson, "such a genuine, pure sound." Something changed in Bernard's gaze, a shadow of emotion quickly suppressed. "You know he has piano lessons," he said, changing the subject. Do you know why? Beatrice hesitated. The teacher mentioned it was Mrs. Clare's wish. My wife was a pianist, Bernard explained, his gaze now lost in memories. She believed that music was a universal language, that it could be felt even by those who couldn't hear it. When we learned of Michael's deafness, still during the pregnancy, Claire promised she would find a way to share her passion with him. He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. The accident happened when we were returning from a doctor's appointment. It was raining. The mountain road is dangerous, his voice faltered. I should have been more careful. Beatrice then understood the extent of the guilt that consumed him. It was not just the pain of loss, but the weight of responsibility he carried. You keep the piano lessons because you promised her, Beatrice concluded softly. Bernard nodded, quickly composing himself. I keep my promise, just as I keep my promise to protect our son. He stood up, indicating that the conversation was over. You may take Michael to the beach today if that's what he wishes, but stay within the property limits and return before lunch. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. As Beatrice reached the door, he added, and Miss Olsen. Do not create expectations you cannot fulfill. Michael has suffered enough loss. The warning was clear, and Beatrice understood its meaning. It wasn't just about following rules, but about protecting an already too wounded heart. Returning to the room, she found Michael sitting on the bed, still patiently waiting. His eyes lit up when he saw her. We're going to the beach, she wrote on the pad, smiling. As they walked together through the garden towards the sand, Beatrice reflected on her conversation with Bernard. There was much more to that family than she had initially imagined. Layers of pain, guilt, interrupted love. She looked at Michael, who walked excitedly beside her, occasionally pointing to birds or clouds in the sky. How could she build a bridge between father and son? How could she make Bernard see that, in trying to shield Michael from suffering, he was inadvertently depriving him of life? On the beach, as she watched the boy collect colorful shells, Beatrice had an idea. Perhaps the answer lay precisely in what both had lost. Not just sound, but the ability to communicate, to connect. And perhaps she, as a stranger in that universe of silence and pain, could be the translator between two worlds that had grown distant. In the days that followed, Beatrice noticed subtle changes in the routine of the Thompson mansion. Bernard remained absent most of the time, but occasionally appeared during Michael's dinner, observing the interaction between the nanny and his son from a distance. He did not participate, did not approach, but simply watched with an impenetrable expression before returning to his office. Michael, on the other hand, visibly blossomed. His posture was more relaxed, his gestures more expressive. He began to draw more frequently, creating colorful landscapes where the sea was always present. In one of these drawings, Beatrice noticed 3 figures holding hands on the beach, one small, one medium, and one large. She didn't need to be an expert to understand the implicit desire in that image. On a particularly warm afternoon, while supervising Michael's lessons, Beatrice felt a migraine approaching. The sleepless nights, divided between caring for the boy and worries about her mother's health in Aspen, were beginning to take their toll. She excused herself from Michael for a few minutes and went to the kitchen in search of a painkiller. She found Mrs. Marcia preparing the afternoon snack, cutting fruit with surgical precision. Needing anything, Miss Olsen? A headache medicine, if you have one. The housekeeper indicated a cabinet above the refrigerator. There's a first aid kit there. But don't delay, young Michael shouldn't be left alone. Beatrice nodded, swallowing the pill with a glass of water. She was about to leave when she noticed Mr. Peterson enter the kitchen with a worried expression. I just took a call from Dr. Caldwell, he said to the housekeeper, seemingly unaware of Beatrice's presence. He rescheduled Michael's appointment for tomorrow morning. Does the master know yet? I left a message with his secretary. But you know how he is with these appointments. He always finds a way not to attend. I don't understand why he insists on avoiding them, Mrs. Marcia sighed. How does he expect the boy to improve if he doesn't follow medical recommendations? Mr. Peterson lowered his voice, but not enough for Beatrice not to hear. The doctor mentioned a new treatment, something experimental. He said it could help with the panic episodes, maybe even improve residual hearing capacity. The housekeeper shook her head. Do you really think that after everything that happened, Mr. Thompson will risk it again? Remember how he was last time, when that American specialist promised miracles? I understand your reservation, but we're talking about Michael's well-being. It's been 5 years, Marcia. 5 years of silence in this house. Beatrice coughed discreetly, alerting them to her presence. Both turned embarrassed. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, she said, heading for the door. Miss Olson, the butler called. How long will you be staying? The question caught her by surprise. Pardon? In this house, he clarified. How long do you intend to remain with us? I don't understand the reason for the question. Mr. Peterson exchanged a meaningful look with the housekeeper before continuing. We've noticed your dedication to young Michael. It's admirable. But we've also noticed that he's growing attached to you. And is that a problem? It can be, Mrs. Marcia intervened. When you leave, like the others before you, he will suffer again. Beatrice felt her face flush. I have no plans to leave. They all say that at first, the housekeeper replied with a sad smile. But this house, this silence, eventually it becomes unbearable. What Mrs. Marcia is trying to say, Mr. Peterson explained in a more conciliatory tone, is that we need to protect Michael. He's already been through enough loss. Are you telling me not to care about him, to treat him like a job and not like a child who needs affection? We are suggesting caution, the butler replied. For your sake and his. Mr. Thompson may seem distant, but he observes everything. If he perceives that Michael is too attached to you. He didn't finish the sentence. It wasn't necessary. The implication was clear. Beatrice would be dismissed. I understand your concern, she said after a moment, but I cannot feign indifference. Michael needs human connection as much as he needs air to breathe. Before they could respond, Beatrice left the kitchen, her head throbbing even harder now. The words of the butler and housekeeper echoed in her mind. Was she being reckless by getting so close to Michael? Was she creating expectations she couldn't fulfill? Returning to the room, she found the boy still focused on his lessons, carefully copying words from a textbook. Beatrice watched him for a moment, noticing how his tongue peeked out at the corner of his mouth when he particularly concentrated, how he frowned when he encountered a difficult word. Small gestures, unique expressions that formed the personality of that child, whom the world insisted on seeing only as the deaf boy. Later that day, after dinner, Beatrice decided to explore the mansion a little more. Michael was already in bed, and she had a few free hours before her own bedtime. The Thompson residence was enormous, with several rooms that remained closed most of the time. Walking down the second-floor hallway, she noticed a half-open door she had never seen open before. She hesitated for a moment, aware that she was intruding, but curiosity was stronger. She gently pushed the door and entered. It was a music studio. Unlike the room where Michael had his piano lessons, this environment seemed more personal, more intimate. The walls were lined with soundproofing, and several framed photographs showed a beautiful young woman, whom Beatrice recognized as Claire, in different performances, always at the piano. In the center of the room, covered by a velvety fabric, was what appeared to be another piano. Beatrice approached slowly, as if fearing to disturb the ghosts that surely inhabited that place. Carefully, she lifted a corner of the fabric, revealing a magnificent white grand piano. This place is off-limits to staff. Bernard Thompson's voice startled her. He stood at the door, his face a mask of coldness that couldn't completely hide the pain in his eyes. Sorry, Mr. Thompson, the door was ajar and you thought that was an invitation to invade private spaces. Beatrice let the fabric fall back over the piano. It wasn't my intention. I was just curious, he completed. Everyone is. Everyone wants to know about the Thompson tragedy, about the businessman who lost his wife and isolated himself from the world. There was bitterness in his voice, a contained anger that seemed about to explode. Beatrice remained still, feeling that any movement could trigger something irreversible. This was her studio, Bernard continued, entering the room and closing the door behind him. Claire spent hours here every day. She said it was where her soul breathed freely. He walked to one of the photographs, running his fingers over the glass, as if he could touch the woman through the image. Was she a professional pianist? She could have been, he replied, his tone now softer. She had enough talent. She studied at the conservatory, performed, received invitations for international tours, but she chose a more private life after we married. She gave private lessons, performed small charity recitals. Music was her way of touching the world without having to leave our home. Beatrice noticed how he spoke of Claire, not as someone who had passed away, but as a constant presence alive in every detail of that room. When we discovered Michael's deafness during the pregnancy, Bernard continued, it was devastating, especially for her. Imagine a musician knowing that her son would never hear her compositions, would never understand her art, in the same way she did. How did she deal with it? A sad smile appeared on Bernard's lips. In the most extraordinary way possible. Instead of lamenting, Claire delved into research. She studied vibratory perception, how deaf people can feel music through other sensations. She adapted this studio, installed special floors that amplified vibrations. She was determined to share her world with Michael, so even if in a different way. He took a deep breath, as if the next words were particularly painful. When Michael was born, she spent hours here with him, still a baby. She would place him on the piano while she played, so he could feel the vibrations throughout his body. She created her own system of lights that pulsed according to the intensity of the music. It was magical to watch. And then came the accident, Beatrice concluded softly. Bernard nodded, unable to verbalize that part. After a moment, he continued. What few people know is that we didn't just lose Claire that day. Michael was in the car with us. He suffered a severe head trauma that aggravated his condition. Doctors feared he wouldn't survive. Beatrice felt her heart clench. I didn't know. No one knows except the doctors and the oldest staff in the house. I prefer to keep it that way. The label of deaf that the world puts on him is enough. He doesn't also need the label of traumatized survivor. Is that why the rules are so strict? The routines, the restrictions? Bernard walked to the covered piano, adjusting the fabric Beatrice had disturbed. After the accident, Michael spent weeks in a coma. When he woke up, besides not hearing, he didn't speak, didn't communicate at all. He had frequent seizures, panic attacks. Doctors said he needed absolute stability, predictability, that any excessive stimulation could trigger crises. And it worked in part. The seizures stopped. He started interacting minimally again. But that was 5 years ago, Beatrice observed. Children recover, adapt. Maybe he doesn't need that level of control anymore. Bernard turned to her, his eyes now hard again. Are you a doctor, Miss Olsen? A neurologist? Do you have any specialization in child trauma that I'm unaware of? No, sir, but... Then don't presume to know what's best for my son. All the decisions I make are based on medical recommendations and daily observation of his condition. With all due respect, Mr. Thompson, when was the last time you truly observed your son? When did you spend more than 5 minutes in the same room as him without being hidden behind a door or a newspaper? The words escaped before she could contain them. Beatrice immediately regretted it, certain she would be fired on the spot. To her surprise, however, Bernard did not explode. Instead, he seemed to be genuinely considering the question. Do you think I don't know what I'm missing? He finally asked, his voice almost a whisper. That I don't see how he looks out the window when I come home from work, waiting for me to enter his room. That I don't notice how he draws figures that can only be the three of us, even though he's never seen a complete family portrait. Then why do you keep your distance? Bernard closed his eyes for a moment, as if searching for strength for the answer. Because every time I look at him, I see Claire. I see what we lost, what we can never recover. And I see my guilt, my responsibility. I was driving that night, Miss Olsen. I should have realized the rain was too heavy, that the road was dangerous. I should have protected my family. And now you're trying to protect what's left of it by keeping your distance? What kind of logic is that? The logic of a broken man, he replied simply. Of someone who fears that his presence will cause more harm than good. Beatrice felt her anger subside, replaced by a deeper understanding of the man's suffering. He was not just a distant father, a businessman obsessed with work. He was someone consumed by guilt, paralyzed by the fear of failing again. Michael needs you, she said softly. Not expensive gifts or private tutors. He needs his father, even if that father is as broken as he is. Bernard did not respond immediately. He walked to the window, watching the moon illuminate the ocean in the distance. There was a time when this studio was always full of music, he said finally. Claire used to say that our home had its own soundtrack. After she left, I couldn't bear the silence anymore, but I also couldn't bear the idea of filling that void with any other sound. He turned to Beatrice. his gaze now different, no longer hard or defensive, but vulnerable, almost pleading. How do you overcome something like this, Miss Olsen? How do you move forward when life as you knew it simply ends? The question hung in the air between them, laden with a pain so deep it seemed palpable. Beatrice felt the weight of the responsibility to answer, knowing that any platitude would be not only inadequate, but offensive in the face of such suffering. I don't know if one ever fully overcomes it, she replied honestly. I think we learn to carry the pain differently. And perhaps we find new reasons to continue. She hesitated before adding, Michael could be that reason. Not just a painful reminder of what you lost, but a promise of what you can still have. Bernard seemed to absorb her words thoughtfully. Finally, he said, Tomorrow Michael has an appointment with Dr. Caldwell at 9 in the morning. For the first time in years, I intend to accompany him. That would be very important for him. Don't create expectations, Miss Olsen. I'm not promising a miraculous transformation, just a small step. Sometimes small steps are all we need. Bernard nodded, indicating that the conversation was over. You may leave now, and please respect the boundaries of this house in the future. Yes, sir. Good night. As she walked back to her room, Beatrice felt a mix of emotions. The conversation with Bernard had revealed layers of complexity she hadn't imagined. Behind the cold, distant businessman was a man devastated by guilt, paralyzed by the fear of causing more harm. She was beginning to understand that the journey to heal that family would be much more challenging than she had initially imagined. Passing Michael's room, she couldn't resist the temptation to open the door slightly to check on him. The boy slept peacefully, the moonlight illuminating his serene face. On the bedside table, Beatrice noticed a new drawing. The same trio of figures on the beach, but this time the largest figure held an instrument that could only be a piano. Not a normal piano, but a piano with legs, as if it were a living creature walking with them on the sand. The image touched Beatrice deeply. It was Michael's vision of his family, not as it had been, but as it could be. A vision where music, his mother's legacy, was not covered by a dusty cloth, but alive, present, part of their daily lives. That night, lying in her bed, Beatrice made a decision. She would not just be a nanny following orders, supervising routines. She would be a bridge between father and son, between past and present, between silence and communication, even if it meant risking her job, even if she encountered resistance at every step. On the other side of the mansion, in his meticulously organized room, Bernard Thompson lay awake, contemplating a photograph of Claire he kept hidden in his bedside table drawer. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a different future. Not a complete life again. That would be impossible. But perhaps a life less empty, less silent. Give me strength, he whispered to the image of the woman he still loved, to do what is right for him, for our son. And it seemed to him that somehow, somewhere beyond his comprehension, Claire smiled back. The next morning dawned with a fine rain, typical of California autumn. Beatrice woke up early to prepare Michael for the doctor's appointment. She found the boy already awake, sitting in bed with an illustrated book about musical instruments. His eyes lit up when he saw her enter. Good morning, she signed, one of the few signs she had learned by observing the sign language teacher. She wasn't fluent yet, but she was trying to learn the basics. Michael responded with the same gesture, a small smile on his face. Today you have an appointment with Dr. Caldwell, she wrote on the notepad. Your father will accompany you. The boy read the message twice, as if he couldn't believe what was written. His expression quickly changed from surprise to distrust, and finally to cautious expectation. He took the pad and wrote in his childish handwriting, True? Yes, Beatrice confirmed. He told me himself yesterday. Breakfast that morning was different. Instead of Michael eating alone in his room as usual, Bernard requested that the meal be served in the main dining room, for the two of them. Beatrice watched from a distance, trying not to interfere, but ready to help if necessary. The scene was as strange as it was touching, father and son sitting on opposite sides of the long dining table, separated by meters of polished wood and years of estrangement. Bernard kept his eyes fixed on the newspaper, occasionally casting quick glances at Michael, who ate in silence, also looking at his father when he thought he wasn't being watched. Communication between them was almost non-existent. reduced to basic gestures, a nod to pass the bread, a questioning look when offering more juice. However, there was something profoundly significant in that shared meal, a first step, small but important, towards each other. When they finished, Bernard carefully folded the newspaper and looked at his watch. "It's time," he said, standing up. He turned to Beatrice, who remained discreet in the corner of the room. "Miss Olsen, you will accompany us." It wasn't a request, but Beatrice realized there was more than a simple order in those words. There was a silent plea for support, for mediation between him and his son. "Of course, Mr. Thompson." Dr. Caldwell's office was in Beverly Hills, in a modern building overlooking the ocean. He was a renowned specialist in pediatric neurology, with particular expertise in children with hearing impairment. The waiting room was filled with educational toys, puzzles, and illustrated books specially designed to stimulate different senses. While they waited, Beatrice noticed how tense Michael seemed, his small hands clasped in his lap. Bernard, sitting on the other side, also showed anxiety, tapping his fingers on the arm of the chair, constantly checking his watch. "First appointment?" asked a woman sitting near them, with a girl of approximately 8 years old beside her. The girl had a visible hearing aid. "No," Beatrice replied politely. "Michael comes regularly." "You must be the Thompsons," the woman said, her face lighting up in recognition. "Dr. Caldwell always speaks wonders about your son's progress." "We're just starting our treatment now with Nina," she indicated her daughter, who smiled shyly. Bernard, who until then seemed oblivious to the conversation, turned in surprise. "The doctor talks about us?" "Of course. He uses Michael's case as an example of resilience, how a child can adapt and progress despite such challenging circumstances." There was something profoundly impactful in that revelation, the idea that, while Bernard saw only limitations and trauma, others saw in his son an example of overcoming, a story of hope. Before he could respond, the secretary called, "Thompson family, Dr. Caldwell is ready to see you." The doctor was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a welcoming smile. He greeted Michael with fluent signs, then shook Beatrice's hand and finally Bernard's, not hiding his surprise. "Mr. Thompson, what a pleasure to have you with us today. How long has it been? 2 years?" "Approximately," Bernard replied, visibly uncomfortable. "I've been following the reports, but nothing replaces presence," the doctor completed gently. "Well, we have a lot to discuss. Michael has made remarkable progress in recent months." The consultation proceeded with a series of tests: cognitive, motor, balance. Michael performed each task with concentration, occasionally looking at Beatrice for encouragement, and to her surprise also at his father. Bernard's presence seemed to have a motivating effect on the boy, who visibly strove to impress. After the initial tests, Dr. Caldwell requested a moment alone with Bernard. Beatrice remained in the examination room with Michael, helping him with a 3-dimensional puzzle the doctor had offered. In the adjacent office, the neurologist showed Bernard a series of exams and reports. As you can see, Michael's brain activity is much more regulated now. The areas affected by the trauma are establishing new connections, compensating for the damage. "Does that mean he could regain his hearing?" Bernard asked, a note of involuntary hope in his voice. The doctor shook his head. "Michael's deafness is congenital, independent of the accident. What we are observing is a recovery of cognitive functions, communication ability, emotional control." He turned the page of the report, indicating a set of graphs. "What particularly impresses me is the acceleration of this progress in the last 2 months. Has something changed in his routine?" Bernard hesitated before replying. "We hired a new nanny. She has different methods." "Different how?" "Less rigid, more interactive." Bernard seemed to choose his words carefully. "She takes him to the beach, reads to him, tries to communicate beyond what's necessary." The doctor smiled. "Exactly what we've been recommending for years, Mr. Thompson. But the crises, the anxiety episodes, they were a reaction to the trauma, not a permanent condition. Michael needed stability in the first few months, perhaps the first year. But after that, what he needed most was precisely what was being denied: stimulation, interaction, emotional connection." The words fell on Bernard like a weight. All these years insisting on rigidity, on inflexible routines, believing he was protecting his son, when in reality he was hindering his recovery. "Why didn't you insist on this in previous consultations?" he asked, a note of accusation in his voice. "I did," the doctor replied calmly. "In every report, in every recommendation. I suggested alternative therapies, outdoor activities, greater family interaction. You received all those documents. I read the reports, but you read them looking for confirmation for what you already believed," Dr. Caldwell completed softly. "It's understandable. After a trauma like the one your family suffered, we cling to anything that seems to offer security, predictability." He stood up, approaching the window. "Do you know what else impresses me about children like Michael? Their ability to adapt, to find new paths when old ones are blocked. They don't get stuck on what they've lost. They find new ways to experience the world." Bernard absorbed the words in silence, each one a blow to his convictions. "What do you suggest now?" he finally asked. "More than has already begun to happen. More interaction, more sensory stimuli. And most importantly, your presence, Mr. Thompson. Michael needs his father." Back in the examination room, Beatrice was helping Michael finish the puzzle when she noticed he seemed uncomfortable, repeatedly rubbing his right ear. "Does it hurt?" she asked on the pad. The boy nodded, wincing. Beatrice immediately alerted the nurse, who quickly checked and called the doctor. After a brief examination, Dr. Caldwell diagnosed a middle ear infection, quite common in children, but requiring immediate treatment. "We'll need to start antibiotics today," he explained to Bernard, who had returned to the room. "And constant monitoring will be necessary overnight. Children with Michael's history can have more intense reactions to pain." On the way back home, Michael fell asleep in the back seat of the car, exhausted after the appointment and uncomfortable with the increasing pain. Bernard drove in silence, lost in thought. Beatrice in the passenger seat felt the tension in the air. "He'll be fine," she said softly, trying to offer some comfort. "Ear infections are common." "It's not just the infection," Bernard replied, his eyes fixed on the rainy road. "It's everything the doctor said. All these years, I was so convinced I knew what was best for him." His voice faltered slightly, and Beatrice realized how much that revelation had shaken him. "You did what you believed was right," she said. "You were trying to protect him." "Perhaps I was trying to protect myself," Bernard admitted, "from failing again, from seeing him suffer again. And in the process, I deprived him of things that could have helped him recover more quickly." He glanced briefly in the rearview mirror, observing his sleeping son. "I seem so fragile." "But he isn't," Beatrice replied. "Dr. Caldwell is right. Michael is more resilient than we think. He just needs the opportunity to show it." The rest of the drive passed in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Upon arriving at the mansion, Bernard surprised Beatrice by carrying Michael in his arms to his room, instead of asking the butler to do so, as would be customary. The afternoon and early evening were dedicated to caring for Michael, whose infection caused significant pain. Bernard cancelled all meetings, staying home for the first time in years. Beatrice prepared warm compresses, following the doctor's instructions, while Mr. Peterson fetched the prescribed medications from the pharmacy. During this period, Beatrice witnessed something she had never expected to see. Bernard Thompson sitting on the edge of his son's bed, trying to comfort him. His gestures were clumsy, insecure, as if he had forgotten how to show affection. Michael, despite the pain, seemed amazed by his father's attention. When the fever began to rise, around 8 in the evening, it was Bernard who administered the antipyretic, carefully following the instructions. And when Michael finally managed to fall asleep, it was he who remained by the bed, observing every movement, every breath. "I can take over now, if you need to rest," Beatrice offered as she entered the room with a tray containing tea and biscuits. "I'm fine," Bernard replied, without taking his eyes off his son. "I prefer to stay." "Can I bring you something then?" "No, thank you." After a pause, he added, "Actually, there's something you could do. In my office, second drawer, there's a book, a photo album." "Could you get it?" Intrigued, Beatrice went to the office. She easily found the album in the indicated drawer, a leather-bound volume visibly old and well-handled. Upon returning to Michael's room, she found Bernard in the same position, silently standing guard. "Thank you," he said, taking the album. He hesitated for a moment before adding, "Would you like to see?" Beatrice nodded, sitting in the armchair near the bed. Bernard opened the album, revealing photographs that told the story of his family, he and Claire Young smiling in front of a simple house. Their wedding, her pregnancy, Michael's birth, the baby's first months. "We lived in Santa Monica when we got married," he explained, pointing to the first photo. "A small apartment, nothing compared to this house. Claire gave piano lessons to supplement my income. I was starting at the construction company, still as a junior engineer." He turned the page, showing a photo of a pregnant Claire sitting at the piano. "When we found out about the pregnancy, it was the happiest moment of our lives. And when the prenatal exam revealed the deafness—" He paused, emotion making it difficult to continue. "It was Claire who kept us strong. She said it was just a challenge, not a sentence." The following pages showed newborn Michael, always in his mother's or father's arms, often near the piano. In one of the images, Claire held the baby to her chest while playing, her expression of pure happiness. She believed that even if he couldn't hear conventionally, Michael could feel the music, Bernard continued. She spent hours researching, talking to specialists, adapting instruments. The last series of photographs showed Michael at approximately 5 years old, sitting at the piano with his mother, his small fingers on the keys. On his face, an expression of absolute concentration. "This was taken a week before the accident," Bernard said, his voice now almost a whisper. "We were returning from an appointment with a specialist in New York City." Claire was excited. The doctor had talked about a new treatment, something experimental that could help Michael develop some sound perception, not hearing itself, but a way to feel specific vibrations. He closed the album gently, as if also closing that memory. "After she was gone, I couldn't continue. The treatment, the lessons, the special communication attempts she had developed. Everything seemed empty without her. And I feared so much, creating false hopes in him, promising things I couldn't deliver." Beatrice observed the man in front of her, no longer the cold, distant businessman, but a father devastated by loss, paralyzed by the fear of failing his son again. "Mr. Thompson," she said softly, "I believe the greatest gift you could give Michael would be to continue what Claire started, not because it promises results, but because it demonstrates love, acceptance, commitment." Bernard remained silent, watching his sleeping son. Finally he said, "When I was little, my father told me that men don't cry, that we must be strong, impassive. I spent my life believing that, building walls around myself. Claire was the only one who managed to break through them. After she was gone, the walls grew even higher," Beatrice completed. "How do you protect a child from suffering when you yourself are drowning in it?" The question remained unanswered. For a few minutes they remained in silence, only the sound of the rain outside filling the room. Suddenly Michael stirred in bed, groaning softly. The fever had returned, leaving his cheeks red and his breathing accelerated. Bernard immediately placed his hand on his forehead. "He's very hot," he said, worried. Beatrice quickly prepared a new dose of the antipyretic, which Bernard carefully administered. The boy briefly opened his eyes, recognizing his father with a look of surprise and relief. "I'm here," Bernard said, even knowing his son couldn't hear him. But the tone of his voice, the expression on his face, the tenderness with which he adjusted the blankets, all of it communicated what words could not. Michael took his father's hand, squeezing it weakly before falling back asleep. Bernard remained like that, holding the small hand as if fearing that by letting go he would lose the newly established connection. "I'll stay with him tonight," he told Beatrice. "You can rest. Are you sure? I can take turns if you need to." "I'm sure." "I've wasted too much time." Beatrice nodded, understanding the importance of that moment. She withdrew discreetly, leaving father and son alone. In the hallway, she found Mr. Peterson, who was observing the scene through the half-open door with an expression of astonishment. "In 5 years," the butler murmured. "I've never seen Mr. Thompson spend a night in the boys' room. People change." "Mr. Peterson," Beatrice replied with a small smile, "sometimes they just need a reason, an opportunity." That night, as the rain fell softly outside, something changed within the Thompson mansion. It was as if the ice began to melt, slowly revealing what had remained preserved beneath its surface all these years. Not just pain and grief, but also love, a deep love that had never truly disappeared, only hidden itself, protecting itself from the world. In her room, Beatrice wrote a letter to her mother in Aspen, reporting the recent events, the progress in her work, the connection she was developing with Michael. She did not mention the salary, nor the luxury of the house, nor the material benefits. She wrote only about what truly mattered, how she had found a purpose beyond what she expected, how she felt she was making a difference in the life of that broken family. Sometimes, "Mom," she concluded, "we find light in the most unexpected places. Sometimes it is in the deepest silences that we discover the most important truths." On the other side of the mansion, in the dim light of the room, illuminated only by a bedside lamp, Bernard Thompson watched over his son's restless sleep. At some point in the early hours, without realizing it, he began to hum a lullaby softly, the same one Claire used to sing to Michael when he was a baby. And although the boy could not hear the melody, something in the vibration of that moment, in his father's presence, in the tenderness of those hands adjusting the blankets, calmed his fever. His sleep became more peaceful, his breathing more regular. For the first time in years, father and son truly rested, connected by something deeper than words, more resilient than sound, a love that, like the music Claire so loved, did not need to be heard to be felt, understood, lived. The next morning brought a timid sun that struggled to pierce through the lingering clouds of the night storm. Beatrice woke up early, concerned about Michael's health. As she approached the boy's room, she was surprised to find the door ajar and hear movements inside. Bernard stood by the window, speaking softly on the phone. "Cancel all commitments this week," he said, his firm tone leaving no room for dispute. "Delegate urgent matters to Ronald. The rest can wait." Noticing Beatrice's presence at the door, he nodded in acknowledgement and continued, "No, Diane, this time it's different. Urgent family matters. Yes, I'll be available by phone for emergencies, but only real emergencies." He hung up and put his phone in his pocket, running a hand through his slightly disheveled hair, a very different image from the always impeccable executive Beatrice knew. "How was his night?" she asked in a low voice, approaching the bed where Michael still slept. "The fever broke around 3 in the morning, Bernard replied. "The doctor said the antibiotic would start working quickly, but still—" He paused as if carefully choosing his next words. "I was worried." That simple admission of concern, of vulnerability, seemed to cost him considerable effort. For a man who had spent years hiding his emotions, acknowledging a feeling, even something as basic as concern for a sick child, represented a significant change. "I'm glad he's better," Beatrice said, gently touching Michael's forehead to check his temperature. "It seems normal now. Dr. Caldwell suggested keeping him at rest for 2 days, even after the fever completely subsides. The infection can return if not treated properly. I'll prepare quiet activities for him then. Perhaps reading, drawing, board games." Bernard nodded, looking at his son with an expression Beatrice couldn't quite decipher. There was tenderness, certainly, but also something deeper, perhaps remorse or determination. "I cancelled my schedule this week," he said, surprising her. "I'll be home." "Michael will be very happy," she replied sincerely. "I'm not doing this just for him," Bernard admitted after a moment of hesitation. "What Dr. Caldwell said yesterday, about me having ignored his recommendations for years, about having limited Michael's progress, I need to understand better, to see for myself." "You want to observe our routine." "I want to participate in it," he corrected. "If you don't mind my presence, of course." The proposal caught Beatrice completely by surprise. In just 1 day, Bernard Thompson had transitioned from an absent, controlling father to someone who asked permission to participate in his own son's life. "Of course I don't mind," she replied, trying to hide her astonishment. "Michael would love it." At that moment, the boy began to wake up, his eyes opening slowly, still heavy with sleep. Seeing his father beside the bed, an expression of confusion crossed his face, quickly replaced by a hesitant smile. Bernard sat on the edge of the bed, gently touching his son's face. "Good morning," he said aloud before remembering that the boy couldn't hear him. Embarrassed, he looked at Beatrice for help. She quickly picked up the notepad and wrote, "Good morning, how do you feel?" Michael read it and slowly replied, "Better. Ear still hurts a little." Bernard watched the interaction intently, absorbing every detail of that form of communication he had ignored for so long. When Beatrice passed the pad to him, he seemed momentarily lost. "Write something for him," she suggested softly. With a hesitation that revealed his discomfort, Bernard took the pen and slowly wrote, "I stayed with you all night. I'm happy you're better." Michael's reaction to reading those words was immediate and moving. His eyes widened, bright with emotion, and without warning, he threw his arms around his father's neck, hugging him tightly. Bernard, clearly surprised by the sudden gesture, remained rigid for an instant before slowly wrapping his arms around his son. He closed his eyes, as if absorbing every second of that moment, every sensation. When they finally separated, there was a suspicious glint in the eyes of the man normally so controlled. "I'll prepare breakfast," Beatrice said, feeling that father and son needed a moment alone. "Something light for Michael, considering the medication." As she left the room, she couldn't help but smile. Something was changing in that house, something fundamental. It was as if a crack had appeared in the wall of ice, separating those two worlds, allowing a ray of light to pass through. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Marcia already preparing the first meal of the day. "Is the boy better?" the housekeeper asked, genuinely concerned. "Yes, the fever broke during the night. And Mr. Thompson is still in his room?" The woman's tone did not hide her perplexity. "Mr. Peterson told me he spent the whole night there, sitting in that uncomfortable armchair." "Yes, he is. And he just cancelled all his appointments for the week to stay home." Mrs. Marcia dropped the spoon she was holding, the metallic clatter echoing in the immaculate kitchen. "That's unprecedented." "People change," Beatrice simply replied. "Rarely so dramatically without a significant catalyst," the housekeeper observed, casting a penetrating glance at Beatrice. "You had something to do with this, didn't you?" "I just did my job," she replied, deflecting the inquisitive gaze. "And perhaps I made some observations that Mr. Thompson needed to hear." "Observations that none of us had the courage to make in 5 years," Mrs. Marcia completed, a newfound respect in her voice. "You have more courage than you appear, young lady." Returning to the room with the breakfast tray, Beatrice found Michael sitting in bed while Bernard flipped through one of the illustrated books on the shelf. There was something profoundly touching about the scene, a father rediscovering his son's world piece by piece, page by page. The days that followed established a new routine in the Thompson mansion. Michael recovered quickly from the infection, and Bernard, true to his word, remained home, progressively involving himself in his son's routine. At first there was awkwardness, hesitation, like two strangers trying to find common ground. Beatrice acted as a facilitator, creating opportunities for interaction, suggesting activities they could both enjoy. On a particularly sunny afternoon, 3 days after the doctor's appointment, Bernard surprised everyone by suggesting a walk through the garden to the private beach. Michael, already fully recovered, was euphoric at the idea. It was the first time father and son had done something like this together since Beatrice arrived at the mansion. Walking a few steps behind, she observed their interaction. Bernard pointed to plants in the garden, to rock formations by the sea, to distant boats on the horizon. He used the notepad he now constantly carried in his pocket, writing names, explanations, questions. The most significant moment happened when they reached the water's edge. Michael, always fascinated by the ocean, ran to feel the waves on his feet. Bernard remained on the sand, watching with an expression divided between joy and apprehension. "Why don't you go with him?" Beatrice suggested, approaching. "I don't." Bernard hesitated, and she realized there was more to his reluctance than simple discomfort. "Does the ocean bring back difficult memories?" she asked gently. He nodded, his eyes still fixed on his son splashing in the shallow waves. "Claire loved the sea. After the accident, I couldn't even look at it without feeling pain," Beatrice completed when he couldn't continue. "But perhaps it's time to associate new memories with this place." Memories with Michael. Bernard reflected on her words, a visible conflict on his face. Finally, he took a deep breath, took off his shoes, and slowly walked to where his son was playing. Michael looked surprised to see his father approach, and then, in a spontaneous gesture, splashed water in his direction. For a terrible instant, Beatrice feared Bernard would react poorly to that childish play. But to her delight, after a moment of shock, he laughed, a hoarse, almost rusty sound, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. and returned the gesture, splashing water with his feet. What followed was an impromptu water fight, with father and son laughing, getting wet, falling in the shallow water. It was as if a dam had burst, releasing years of repressed joy, unfulfilled play, lost moments. When they finally came out of the water, completely soaked but smiling, Bernard looked years younger. Michael, radiant, held his father's hand tightly, as if fearing that this newfound connection might disappear. "We have to do this more often," Bernard told Beatrice as they walked back home. It wasn't a casual observation, but a promise. That night, something even more significant happened. After dinner, instead of retreating to his office as he usually did, Bernard asked Michael through the notepad if he would like him to read a story before bed. Michael was so surprised by the invitation that he had to read the message twice. His yes in response was written in large, enthusiastic letters, taking up almost the entire page. Sitting side by side on the bed, with Beatrice discreetly watching from the doorway, father and son shared their first reading moment. Bernard had chosen a richly illustrated book about underwater explorers. It wasn't a conventional reading. He showed the images, wrote small comments on the pad, occasionally made gestures to complement the story. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward pauses, moments of uncertainty, but there was also a touching authenticity, a genuine effort from both sides to build a bridge over the abyss that had separated them for so long. When Michael finally fell asleep, Bernard remained by his side for a few minutes, just observing his serene face. As he left the room, he found Beatrice in the hallway. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For showing me what I was missing." There was a raw emotion in his voice, a vulnerability he had never shown before. "For not giving up on him. Or on me." The next day, during breakfast, Bernard surprised everyone once again. After the meal, he asked Michael and Beatrice to accompany him. He led them to a rarely visited part of the mansion, the east wing of the second floor, where he had shared quarters with Claire and, more importantly, the music studio Beatrice had discovered days before. He stopped before the studio door, a momentary hesitation before turning the doorknob. The environment remained as Beatrice had seen it previously: the soundproofed walls, the framed photographs, the piano covered by the velvety fabric. Michael entered cautiously, his eyes scanning every detail. It was evident he knew the place, but the expression on his face suggested it had been a long time since his last visit. Bernard walked to the covered piano, standing before it for a long moment. Finally, with a decisive gesture, he removed the fabric, revealing the instrument in all its beauty. It was not the piano in the music room where Michael had lessons. This one was special, customized. Beatrice noticed unusual details: lights embedded in the structure, an amplification system at the base, the surrounding floor modified in some way. "This was your mother's piano," Bernard wrote on the pad, showing Michael. "She adapted it especially for you." The boy approached slowly, almost reverently. His fingers touched the keys delicately, as if fearing to break them. The moment he pressed a key, something magical happened. The embedded lights in the piano flashed in sync with the note, and Beatrice realized that the floor itself vibrated subtly. "Claire created this system," Bernard explained, now speaking directly to Beatrice, while Michael explored the instrument. "The lights correspond to the notes, different colors for different frequencies. And she installed speakers under the floor that transmit specific vibrations for each tone. It's incredible," Beatrice murmured, genuinely impressed by the ingenuity and love behind that creation. She spent years developing this. She consulted sound engineers, acoustic specialists, doctors, all so Michael could experience music in a way that made sense to him. As he spoke, he watched his son, who was now pressing several keys in sequence, fascinated by the light pattern he created. The boy's face was illuminated by a joy that went beyond simple pleasure. There was recognition, connection with something profoundly significant. "After the accident," Bernard continued, his voice now lower, "I locked this place up. I couldn't bear the idea of coming in here without her. And over time, it just became easier to keep the door closed. And now?" Beatrice asked softly. Bernard looked at Michael, who continued to explore the piano, completely absorbed. "Now I realize that by trying to bury my pain, I also buried the most important parts of our lives. The parts Michael needed most." He approached his son, kneeling beside him. He took the pad and wrote, Would you like to learn to play as your mother would teach? Michael's response was immediate, not through written words, but through a tight hug, his small arms wrapping around his father's neck with force, as if fearing that offer could be withdrawn at any moment. When they finally separated, Bernard had tears in his eyes which he made no attempt to hide. "I'll need help," he told Beatrice. "I'm not a musician like Claire was." "Mrs. Eleanor could help," she suggested. She knew Claire's method, didn't she? Yes, they worked together, and there are notes, adapted sheet music, an entire system Claire developed. He turned to his son again. "Writing, we'll start tomorrow. Mrs. Eleanor will come to help us." As she watched father and son explore the special piano together, Beatrice felt a deep emotion. She was witnessing not just a reconciliation, but a rebirth of hope, of possibilities, of a family that had been lost in silence and now found new ways of communication. In the days that followed, a gradual transformation occurred in the Thompson mansion. The studio, once locked and forbidden, became the heart of the house. Mrs. Eleanor came daily, no longer to give formal lessons, but to guide father and son in rediscovering Claire's special method. Beatrice watched, marveling, as Michael blossomed under this new approach. It wasn't just a matter of learning music. It was about connection, about communication on a level that transcended conventional words or sounds. The system of lights and vibrations created a language he could fully comprehend, allowing him to experience music in a deeply meaningful way. And Bernard. The change in him was perhaps even more remarkable. The rigid and distant man gave way to someone more patient, more present. He learned alongside his son, made mistakes, laughed at his own limitations. The barrier of perfection he had built around himself began to crumble, revealing a humanity that had been hidden for too long. One afternoon, while Michael practiced with Mrs. Eleanor, Bernard called Beatrice for a private conversation in his office. She entered apprehensive, fearing that with the growing closeness between father and son, her services might no longer be needed. "Please sit," he said, indicating the chair in front of the desk. He seemed nervous, something unusual for a man normally so controlled. "I need to discuss something important with you." "Of course, Mr. Thompson." He hesitated as if he didn't quite know where to begin. "These last few weeks have been transformative. For Michael, certainly, but also for me. I rediscovered my son, and somehow I rediscovered myself in the process." "I'm very happy for both of you," Beatrice said sincerely. "And it wouldn't have happened without you," he continued. "Your courage in challenging my rules, your persistence in showing that there were other possible paths, changed everything." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "However, I realize that by growing closer to Michael, I may inadvertently be complicating your work. The boundaries between Nanny and father are less clear now." "I don't see that as a problem," Beatrice replied, feeling a tightness in her chest. "In fact, I consider it a positive development." "I do too," he quickly assured her. "But it made me think about your role in this house, about the future." Here it was, Beatrice thought. The polite dismissal, the thank you for services rendered, followed by the notice that they would no longer be needed. "I understand," she said, trying to maintain her composure. "If you feel my presence is no longer necessary—" "On the contrary," Bernard interrupted, "I want to propose a change in your role. No longer as a nanny, but as Michael's permanent tutor." Beatrice looked at him, surprised. "Tutor?" "Michael has specific educational needs that go beyond the traditional school curriculum. He will need someone who understands his unique way of learning, who can adapt the material, who can help him fully develop his potential." He stood up, walking to the window before continuing. "Furthermore, you have developed a connection with him that cannot be easily replaced. He trusts you, responds to you in a way he doesn't with other adults." "I'm honored by the proposal," Beatrice replied, still processing the unexpected turn of events. "Naturally, this would involve a permanent contract with a significantly higher salary and additional benefits, including medical assistance for your mother in Aspen." Beatrice felt her heart quicken. She hadn't mentioned her mother's illness to Bernard. "How did you know?" "I have resources, Miss Olson, and a genuine interest in helping someone who has helped my family so deeply." The generosity of the offer was overwhelming. Not just a permanent job, but the guarantee that her mother would receive the treatment she so desperately needed. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say you accept," Bernard replied with a rare smile. "Michael will be ecstatic, and frankly so will I." Beatrice nodded, too moved to speak. More than the job, more than financial security, what truly touched her was knowing that she had found her place, not just as an employee, but as an integral part of that family's recovery, as a bridge between worlds that had been separated for too long. That night, as she helped Michael get ready for bed, the boy surprised her with a drawing, a colorful image showing 3 figures at a piano, one large, one medium, and one small. Below, in his childish handwriting, he had written, "My family." Beatrice felt her eyes well up. In that simple drawing was all the transformation of the past few weeks, not just the reconciliation between father and son, but the creation of something new, something that transcended loss, that built a future from the fragments of the past. Outside the room, Bernard watched the scene through the half-open door. His face, once always marked by tension, now showed a serenity he hadn't displayed in years. The silence that for so long had been a prison now transformed into a space of possibilities, of connection, of renewed hope. The following months brought a remarkable transformation to the Thompson mansion. What was once a cold and silent environment gradually became a vibrant home full of life. Rigid routines gave way to a more flexible structure, allowing space for spontaneity, discoveries, and moments of pure joy. Beatrice, now officially Michael's tutor, dedicated herself to developing a personalized educational program that respected the boy's specific needs, but also stimulated his potential. It wasn't just about teaching him to read and write better, or to advance in math and science. It was about introducing him to the world in all its complexity and beauty, through means he could fully comprehend. A fundamental part of this program involved the development of a more sophisticated sign language. The former teacher now came 3 times a week, and not only Michael learned, Bernard and Beatrice also actively participated in the lessons, transforming communication into a family project. "It's fascinating," Bernard commented one evening after a particularly productive session. "I always thought of sign language as an inferior substitute for speech. Now I realize it's a complete form of expression, with nuances and possibilities I never imagined." Beatrice smiled, noticing how he discreetly practiced the signs he had learned, even when he thought no one was watching. "It's a completely different perspective, isn't it? To realize that there are other forms of communication as rich as verbal ones." "Claire always said that," he replied, a nostalgic tone in his voice that no longer carried the acute pain of before, "that we needed to expand our definition of language, of music, of connection. I didn't fully understand what she meant until now." The music studio had become the pulsating heart of the house. Michael spent hours there daily, exploring not only the special piano, but also other instruments Bernard began to acquire. A modified percussion system, with touch-sensitive lights, a cello adapted with vibration sensors, a digital harp that created colorful waves in the air as the strings were played. Mrs. Eleanor, the piano teacher, was amazed by the boy's progress. "He has his mother's talent," she commented after a particularly impressive lesson. "It's not just technique, it's intuition, it's soul." Claire would be so proud. Bernard, who attended all the lessons, simply nodded, unable to express in words the emotion he felt, seeing his son connect so deeply with Claire's legacy. One Saturday morning, 3 months after the initial transformation, Beatrice was surprised to find Bernard in the kitchen, preparing breakfast himself, something unthinkable in the past. "Good morning," he greeted animatedly. "I hope you like pancakes. It's my grandmother's recipe. She always made them on weekends when I was a child." "I didn't know you cooked," Beatrice commented, observing his surprisingly skillful movements in the kitchen with curiosity. "I used to cook quite a lot, actually. When Claire and I got married, we lived in a small apartment in Santa Monica without staff. We took turns with household chores." He smiled as he flipped a perfectly golden pancake. "Then with the company's success, we hired staff and I just stopped. Like many other things that gave me pleasure. There was a new honesty in Bernard, an ability to reflect on the past without sinking into it. It was as if by reconnecting with his son, he had also reconnected with parts of himself long forgotten. "I have a surprise planned for today," he continued, serving the pancakes on colorful plates, another novelty in the previously monochromatic house. "For Michael, but also for you." "A surprise? May I know what it is? It wouldn't be a surprise if I told you, would it?" His eyes shone with a joviality that made him almost unrecognizable compared to the somber man of months ago. "Just be ready at 10 with Michael. And bring clothes for a full day out." The surprise turned out to be a visit to the Huntington Botanical Gardens in San Marino, California, a place Claire loved and frequented regularly with Michael as a baby, but which they hadn't visited since the accident. Bernard had planned everything meticulously, including hiring a guide specialized in assisting people with hearing impairments. The day was magical. As they walked through the shaded avenues lined with ancient trees, Michael absorbed every detail with wide-eyed wonder: the vibrant colors of the tropical flowers, the varied textures of the foliage, the patterns of light and shadow created by the sun filtering through the canopies. The guide, using a combination of sign language and illustrated cards, explained the different species, their origins, their adaptations to the environment. Michael was fascinated, asking questions through signs, pointing to details he wanted to understand better. At one point, Bernard stepped back a little, watching his son and the guide examine a carnivorous plant. Beatrice approached him, noticing the expression on his face, a mixture of joy and something that seemed almost melancholic. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly. "Yes," he replied without taking his eyes off his son. "Just thinking about how much time we lost, how many days like this we could have had." "Perhaps it's better to focus on the days you will still have," Beatrice suggested. "On the future, not the past." Bernard nodded, turning to face her. "You know, when Claire was pregnant and we found out about Michael's deafness, we went through all the phases: denial, anger, bargaining. And then one day she simply said, 'It doesn't matter that our son cannot hear the world as we do. What matters is that we learn to hear the world as he does.' I didn't fully understand the meaning of that at the time. And now? Now I realize she was talking about a completely different way of perceiving reality. Not as a limitation, but as a unique perspective." He paused, watching Michael, who was now delicately touching the petals of an orchid. Look at him. He's not missing anything by not hearing the noise around him. He's completely immersed in the moment, connected with what he's experiencing in a way that many of us, with perfect hearing, rarely achieve. It was a profound observation, revealing how much Bernard had evolved in his understanding, not only of his son's condition, but of the very nature of the human experience. Lunch was served at a restaurant in the botanical garden itself, at an outdoor table under the shade of an old jackfruit tree. Michael ate animatedly, occasionally signing to describe something he had seen during the tour. "He's expressing himself so well," Bernard commented proudly. 3 months ago, we could barely get a written sentence on the notepad." "Sign language opened up a new world for him," Beatrice agreed. "It's not just about communicating basic needs. It's about expressing complex thoughts, emotions, ideas." "I was thinking," Bernard began hesitantly, "maybe it's time to consider school." The suggestion caught Beatrice by surprise. Michael had always been homeschooled, with private tutors coming to the mansion. The idea of attending a regular school with other children was completely new. "There's a school in Bel Air," Bernard continued, clearly having researched the matter, "specializing in inclusive education with a bilingual program for deaf children, English and sign language. Dr. Caldwell mentioned it at the last appointment." "How would the adaptation be?" "Michael has never been in an environment like that. It would be gradual, of course, starting with a few hours a week, increasing as he feels comfortable. And you would continue as his tutor, accompanying him initially, helping with the transition." Beatrice considered the proposal, imagining what it would be like for Michael. The challenges, certainly, but also the possibilities of new friendships, new experiences, a world expanded beyond the mansion walls. "I think it would be wonderful for him," she finally said. "Scary at first, but deeply enriching in the long run." "Then it's decided. We'll visit the school next week to learn about the program." Michael, realizing he was the topic of conversation, looked inquiringly at the two of them. Bernard smiled, making the sign for school followed by the sign for new friend. The boy's eyes widened, a mixture of excitement and apprehension evident on his face. He made the sign for when, to which Bernard replied with the sign for soon. That simple exchange, conducted entirely in sign language, represented all the progress they had achieved. It wasn't just Michael learning to communicate. In new ways, it was the entire family finding a common language, a shared ground where they could truly meet. The rest of the day at the botanical gardens passed peacefully, with more discoveries, more moments of connection. On the way back home, Michael fell asleep in the back seat of the car, exhausted but visibly happy. "Thank you," Bernard said softly as he drove. "For today, for everything." "You don't need to thank me," Beatrice replied, smiling. "Seeing Michael like this and you too is reward enough. Even so, I want you to know how much I value what you've done for our family. Not just as a tutor, but as—" he hesitated, searching for the right word, "as a catalyst for change." Upon arriving at the mansion, Mr. Peterson greeted them with a worried expression. "Mr. Thompson, I need to speak with you privately." "An urgent matter." Bernard frowned but nodded. "Beatrice, could you take Michael upstairs? I'll catch up with you." As she helped the sleepy boy get ready for a bath, Beatrice couldn't help but worry. The butler's tone suggested something serious, possibly related to Bernard's business, which, although he was more present at home, still managed a large company. Half an hour later, when Michael was clean and in his pajamas, playing with an adapted board game, Bernard appeared at the bedroom door, his face an indescribable mask. "Michael," he signed, "I need to talk to Beatrice for a moment. I'll be back soon for our story." In the office, Bernard closed the door and stood, appearing strangely agitated. "Has something happened?" Beatrice asked, concerned. "I received some correspondence today," he replied slowly. "Something that was kept at the law firm that has represented our family for years." He picked up an envelope from the desk and held it for a moment, as if weighing his options. "It's a letter from Claire." Beatrice felt a shiver run down her spine. "From your wife? But how?" "Apparently she wrote it a few weeks before the accident and gave it to Mr. Davies, our lawyer, with specific instructions. It was to be delivered to me 5 years after her passing, should anything happen to her." 5 years. Exactly the time that had passed since the accident. The coincidence, if it was a coincidence, was striking. "Have you read it yet?" Bernard shook his head. "I couldn't. I've been looking at this envelope for an hour, unable to open it." "I understand," Beatrice said softly. "It must be very difficult." "It's not just that," he admitted. "It's the fear. Fear of what she might have written, of the expectations she might have had for me, for Michael. Expectations I probably didn't meet. Or perhaps it's a message of love, of understanding. Perhaps they are words you need to hear now, especially now." Bernard looked at the envelope in his hands, Claire's elegant handwriting clearly visible on the outside. "To Bernard, with all my love. I'd like you to stay," he finally said, "while I read, if you don't mind." "Of course," Beatrice replied, moved by the trust he placed in her. With slightly trembling hands, Bernard opened the envelope and unfolded the pages inside. He took a deep breath before beginning to read. Beatrice watched emotions cross his face as he read. Surprise, sadness, occasionally a small smile. When he finished, he remained silent for several minutes, just holding the pages, absorbing their content. Finally, he looked at Beatrice, his eyes moist. "She knew," he said, his voice choked. "Somehow she knew." "Knew what?" "That I would get lost without her. That I would build walls around Michael, trying to protect him, when what he really needed was connection, openly expressed love." He extended the pages to Beatrice. "Read, please." Hesitantly, she accepted the sheets, feeling the emotional weight of those words, the intimacy of the moment. "My dearest Bernard," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means the unthinkable has happened and I am no longer by your side. It also means that 5 years have passed, enough time. I hope, for the acute pain to have begun to subside, for you to be able to hear my words not with despair, but with an open heart." Beatrice continued reading, absorbing the eloquence and wisdom of Claire's words. It was an extraordinary letter, not just a farewell but a guide, a beacon pointing the way through the darkness she had somehow foreseen would envelop her family. I know you better than anyone, my love, the letter continued. I know how you react to pain by withdrawing, building fortresses, trying to control the uncontrollable. I know your tendency will be to isolate Michael, to overprotect him, to try to create a perfect and safe world for him. But I ask you to resist that impulse. Our son does not need perfection. He needs life with all its messiness, its surprises, its infinite possibilities. There were specific paragraphs about music, about how Claire hoped Bernard would continue the work they had started together. Not just the piano lessons, but the exploration of new forms of musical perception adapted to Michael's unique reality. Music is not just sound, my love. It is vibration, it is light, it is movement. It is a language that transcends conventional hearing, that can be felt by the entire body, by the entire soul. Do not allow our son to be deprived of this world just because he experiences it differently. And then, in the part that touched Beatrice most, there was an almost prophetic passage. One day, perhaps when you least expect it, someone will enter your lives, someone who will see Michael not just as the deaf boy, but as the extraordinary human being he is. Someone who will challenge your rules, your certainties, who will remind you of what it is like to live fully, not just to exist. When that person appears, Bernard, please do not resist. Do not hide behind walls. Open your heart. Allow yourself to be transformed. Beatrice felt a lump in her throat as she finished reading. Claire's words seemed strangely directed at the present, as if somehow she had foreseen not only the challenges her family would face, but also the solution they would eventually find. It's almost as if she's describing you, Bernard said softly. Someone who would enter our lives and change everything. Beatrice returned the pages, deeply moved. She was an extraordinary woman. Yes, he agreed, carefully putting the letter back in the envelope. And she was right. About everything. They remained silent for a few moments, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Finally, Bernard said, "There's something else in the letter. Something Claire hid for Michael to find when he was ready. What is it? A composition. A piece she wrote especially for him, adapted to the system she created, with lights, vibrations, a complete multi-sensory experience. She hid it somewhere in the studio, with clues that only Michael could decipher, when he was old enough and understood enough." A musical treasure hunt, Beatrice said, delighted with the idea. Exactly, and I believe now is the right time to begin that search. Returning to the room, they found Michael still awake, eagerly awaiting the promised story. Instead, Bernard sat on the edge of the bed and, using a combination of signs and the notepad, began to explain about Claire's letter, about the hidden treasure she had left behind. The boy's eyes grew brighter and brighter as he understood. It wasn't just a composition. It was a direct connection to the mother he barely remembered, a bridge over the abyss of time and absence. "When can we look?" he wrote on the pad, the excitement evident in his hurried handwriting. "Tomorrow," Bernard replied in signs. "So we'll start tomorrow." That night, as the Thompson mansion silently fell asleep, something new hung in the air, not just hope or joy, but a sense of shared purpose, of destiny unfolding exactly as it should. As if the pieces of a complex puzzle were finally beginning to fit together, revealing a larger pattern that had been there all along, just waiting to be discovered. In her room, Beatrice wrote another letter to her mother in Aspen, now undergoing treatment at a private clinic, thanks to Bernard's generosity. She wrote about the day at the Botanical Gardens, about Michael's progress, about Claire's extraordinary letter. "It's strange, Mum," she wrote, "but sometimes I feel as if I was guided here, as if my presence in this house wasn't accidental, but part of something bigger, something that began long before I arrived." Across the hallway, Bernard remained awake, rereading Claire's letter by the light of the bedside lamp. Every word resonated with new understanding, new meanings. It was as if she were speaking directly to him across time, guiding him back to the light when he had been lost in darkness for so long. "Thank you," he whispered to her photograph he kept on the bedside table, "for never giving up on us even when I did." And in the next room, Michael slept peacefully, dreaming of music he could see, of vibrations that told stories, of a treasure hidden by his mother who, even absent, continued to shape his life in profound and unexpected ways. The mansion, once a mausoleum of painful memories, now pulsed with possibilities, with anticipation for the next day, for the adventure that awaited them, Not just the search for a hidden composition, but the continuous rediscovery of each other, of themselves, of the infinite ways to communicate beyond words. The next morning dawned sunny, as if the sky itself participated in the anticipation that hung over the Thompson mansion. Michael woke up even before his usual time, his eyes shining with the excitement of the quest about to begin. He didn't even wait for Beatrice to help him. He dressed himself, made his bed, and was sitting on the edge, swinging his legs impatiently, when she finally entered the room. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she signed, smiling as she realized that, for the first time, she was the one who was late, not him. Michael responded with a quick sequence of signs. "Can we start now? Is Dad awake yet? Are we going to the studio?" "Calm down," Beatrice signed, laughing at the boy's excitement. "First breakfast. We need energy for this adventure." In the kitchen, they found Bernard already making pancakes, once again taking on the task he used to delegate to the staff. There was a lightness in his movements, an energy Beatrice did not fail to notice. He too was eager for the quest, as excited as his son. "Good morning, explorers," he greeted, placing a generous plate of pancakes before Michael, who immediately began to devour them. "Someone's in a hurry, it seems." "I don't know who's more excited," Beatrice commented, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "Father or son?" Bernard smiled, a genuine smile that still surprised Beatrice every time it appeared. "I confess I spent a good part of the night thinking about it. I reread the letter several times, looking for additional clues. Claire was meticulous in everything she did. I'm sure she planned every detail of this search." After breakfast, they headed to the music studio. The environment, once so laden with melancholy, now vibrated with possibilities. Michael ran to the special piano, as if he believed the musical treasure would be hidden there. "Where do we start?" Beatrice asked, watching as the boy already examined every inch of the instrument. Bernard took Claire's letter, which he carried with him. "There's a specific part that mentions the treasure," he said, flipping through the pages until he found the passage. "Here it is. When Michael is ready, when you are ready as a family, he will find my final gift. It is hidden where light and sound meet, protected by a riddle that only open hearts can solve." "Where light and sound meet," Beatrice repeated, looking around the studio. "The piano's light system? The soundproofed walls?" Michael, even though he couldn't hear the conversation, seemed to have his own ideas. He walked decisively to a sheet music stand in the corner of the room, beginning to examine every book, every folder. "He has an instinct," Bernard commented, watching his son with admiration. Claire used to say that Michael had a special way of perceiving the world, a sensitivity that amply compensated for his lack of hearing. For almost 2 hours, they meticulously explored the studio, checking drawers, examining the sheet music, even removing paintings from the walls to make sure nothing was hidden behind them. Michael showed admirable persistence, never getting discouraged, moving from one corner to another with unwavering determination. It was Beatrice who noticed it first, a pattern on the wooden floor near the window, something almost imperceptible unless the sunlight hit it at precisely the right angle. "Bernard," she called, pointing. "Look at this." He approached, kneeling to examine what she had discovered. They were subtle markings in the wood, forming what appeared to be a musical staff, the 5 horizontal lines where notes are written. "Michael," Bernard called with a gesture, attracting his son's attention. When the boy approached, he pointed to the pattern on the floor. Michael's eyes widened in immediate recognition. This was not a casual imperfection. It was a deliberate sign. Carefully, Bernard pressed the area, feeling that a section of the floor moved slightly. "I think it's a compartment," he said, excited. "Help me move it." The 3 of them together managed to slide the section of the floor, revealing a small hidden space underneath. Inside was a beautifully carved wooden box with the name Michael engraved on the lid, surrounded by small musical notes. The boy stared intently at the box, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. His hands trembled slightly when he finally picked it up, touching the letters of his name with his fingertips. "Open it," Bernard signed gently. "It's for you!" "From your mother." With reverential care, Michael lifted the lid. Inside was a vinyl record carefully wrapped in silk fabric, several sheets of handwritten sheet music, and a small golden USB drive. But what truly captured everyone's attention was the envelope on top, with the word first written in Claire's elegant handwriting. Michael looked at his father, as if asking permission to open it. Bernard nodded, his emotion as evident as his son's. Carefully, the boy opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. As he read the content, his eyes filled with tears. He extended the letter for Bernard and Beatrice to read as well. "My dearest Michael," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means you have grown and become the special boy I always knew you would be. It also means your father has found his way back, to music, to life, to you. I am so proud of you both." Bernard swallowed hard, fighting his own emotion to continue reading aloud to Beatrice, while Michael followed along on the paper. "What you have found in this box is my heart transformed into music, a composition I created thinking of you, of how you feel the world, of how you perceive beauty in ways many will never understand. I titled it Beyond Sound, because true music, my son, transcends what the ears can capture. It lives in the heart, in the soul, in the vibrations that pass through our entire being." There were detailed instructions on how to use the material. The record contained the original recording. The sheet music was adapted to the special system Claire had developed, and the USB drive stored an enhanced digital version with specific programming for the studio's light and vibration system. To fully reproduce this experience, you will need something more, something I kept elsewhere. Look in the piano where the heart of music pulses. There you will find the last piece of this puzzle. Michael immediately ran to the piano, beginning to carefully examine the instrument. After a few minutes of searching, his fingers found a small hidden button under the keyboard. When he pressed it, a secret compartment opened on the side of the piano, revealing a small box. Inside was a device none of them immediately recognized. It looked like a combination of a projector and a sound system, with connections for the piano and the floor's vibration system. "Incredible," Bernard murmured, examining the device. "She must have worked with engineers to create this. It's a holographic projection system synchronized with the piano." Following Claire's instructions, they connected the USB drive to the device, which in turn was linked to the piano and the ambient sound system. The studio lights were dimmed, creating the ideal atmosphere for the experience. "Are you ready?" Bernard signed to Michael, who nodded eagerly. When the system was activated, something extraordinary happened. The entire studio transformed. Colored lights began to pulse from the piano in intricate patterns, projecting onto the walls in dancing shapes. The floor vibrated with varying intensities, creating a tactile experience that perfectly accompanied the visual projections. And then, the music began. For Bernard and Beatrice, it was a melody of breathtaking beauty, notes that flowed like water, building an emotional narrative that spoke of love, hope, and transcendent connection. But for Michael, it was much more. Each note translated into color, into vibration, into movement. His expression was one of pure awe, as if he was witnessing a miracle. With tears streaming freely down his face, he placed his hands on the piano, feeling the vibrations course through his fingers, his arms, his entire body. He closed his eyes for a moment, completely immersed in the experience, and then opened them again, not wanting to miss a single second of the visual spectacle that accompanied the composition. The piece lasted approximately 7 minutes in which time seemed to suspend, in which past and present merged, in which Claire was again present among them, not as a painful memory, but as a living, pulsating force. When the music finally ceased and the lights gradually returned to normal, the silence that followed was not empty or heavy. It was a full, meaningful silence, the kind of silence that contains all the words that don't need to be spoken. Michael was the first to move, running to hug his father with an intensity that almost knocked him over. Bernard wrapped him tightly, his own tears now flowing freely. He extended an arm, including Beatrice in the embrace, forming a perfect circle, 3 people connected by something deeper than blood ties, more lasting than words. When they finally separated, Michael ran to the piano and began to play. It wasn't a reproduction of Claire's composition, but something new, hesitant notes at first, gradually gaining confidence, forming a simple but deeply emotional melody. "He's creating," Bernard said in a low voice, amazed, responding to her music with his own. Beatrice watched, feeling that she was witnessing something sacred, not just a boy playing the piano, but a son conversing with his mother across time, across silence. through the universal language that Claire had always believed music could be. Weeks later, Michael had his first day at the new school. As expected, he was nervous, clinging to Beatrice's hand as they walked through the corridors. But when he entered the room and saw other children using sign language, his face lit up. Even before Beatrice could properly say goodbye, he was already interacting with a group of students, his fingers flying in animated conversation. Bernard, who had made sure to accompany his son at this important moment, watched with a mixture of pride and melancholy. "He'll be fine," Beatrice said, noticing his apprehension. "I know he will," he replied. "It's just, Claire should be here to see this." "She is," Beatrice replied softly. "In a way she never truly left. She's in every note Michael plays, in every new sign he learns, in every step you take together." On the way back home, Bernard drove in contemplative silence. Finally he said, "You know, when I hired you, I only expected someone to supervise Michael. I never imagined I would find a partner on this journey." Beatrice felt her heart quicken slightly. "It's been an honor to be a part of this, to see you two find your way back to each other, to see Michael flourish, and to see you become an indispensable part of our lives," he completed, glancing at her briefly, before returning his attention to the road. "I can no longer imagine our family without you, Beatrice." Family. The word hung between them, laden with meanings, with future possibilities. "Me neither," she admitted softly. That night, in the mansion, that no longer seemed like a mausoleum of painful memories, but a vibrant home full of life, Bernard played the piano for the first time in 5 years. He was not a virtuoso like Claire, but he played with soul, with newfound passion. Michael sat beside him on the bench, his hands occasionally joining his father's on the keys, creating improvised harmonies. Beatrice watched from a nearby armchair, absorbing the beauty of that moment, not just the sound of the music, but the image of father and son reconnected, reconciled, reborn in a way. For a fleeting instant, she had the impression of seeing a feminine figure standing by the window, a graceful silhouette bathed in moonlight. She blinked and the image disappeared. But somehow she knew Claire was there, witnessing the scene she had so deeply desired. Silence would never again be a barrier in that house. It had transformed into a space of infinite possibilities, a blank canvas where new stories could be written, not with conventional words or sounds, but with the universal language of the heart, which transcends all limitations, crosses all abysses, and connects souls beyond any physical or temporal obstacle. Because in the end, the deepest lesson Claire had left was precisely this, that true love does not need to be heard to be felt. It resonates at frequencies that transcend ordinary senses, vibrating directly from heart to heart. And once awakened, it continues to echo eternally. Like the most beautiful of songs, heard not with the ears, but with the soul. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Michael, Bernard, and Beatrice's story has touched your heart. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives. Find it here by clicking on the left. If this story about communication beyond words resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the transformative power of love. What was the moment that moved you the most? Share in the comments. Remember, sometimes the deepest connections happen in silence when we learn to listen with our hearts.